Just shout. Hello, everyone. My name is Yvette Subramanian. I work here at CITRIS, and I'm pleased to introduce today's Research Exchange speaker. I just want to welcome our web viewers. As you know, the Research Exchanges are broadcast to our other CITRIS campuses at Merced, Davis, and Santa Cruz. And today's speaker is actually from Davis. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Kornbluth. He is the founder of the UC Davis D-Lab, and he'll talk today about his approach to designing energy products and services for our customers in Zambia, Bangladesh, and India. He has a PhD in mechanical engineering from UC Davis, and his research focus has been on renewable energy technologies. So,
awesome.
Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kornbluth.
Thanks, Yvette. So I was outside and I saw the line to get in here, and I was wondering what was the deal. And then I found out there was free lunch. So, anyways, welcome. I drove here from Davis. I could be in Davis watching myself, I guess, because I think this is broadcast in Davis. I had car trouble on the way here, actually, in front of, my car is sitting over in front of Hopkins Street Bakery, and I had to hitchhike from there to get here, just to show you that I'm dedicated to giving this talk today. And on a serious note, anyone who can give me a ride directly after this talk to Hopkins Street Bakery, that would be appreciated. What's that? I will, yes. But seriously, I need a ride. Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you. Anyway, it's great to come here at CITRIS. I spend some time in Berkeley these days because I do some projects with the Blum Center. I founded D-Lab, but I also founded the Program for International Energy Technologies at Davis. When you get your PhD and you don't know what you want to do, just start a program and then appoint yourself the director. And that's exactly what I did. I like Davis. I really liked the work that I was doing at Davis. They gave me a lot of freedom to do different kinds of research. My passions are both in the field of energy and also in working in developing countries. I worked about a decade in developing countries. So they gave me the room. They said, hey, if you want to raise all your own money and start a program, we'll let you do that. And so that's what I did. And I've had a lot of help, though, from Energy Efficiency Center, the UC Davis Energy Institute. CITRIS has also helped out, and the Blum Center's helped out a lot. And we do some stuff for the Blum Center, which I'll talk a little more about. Oh, so if you were to Google me, what would you find? You might see a picture of me sitting in front of a huge biogas digester in Zambia, which is what this is right here. And you guys know what biogas, all the advantages of biogas. You get energy from waste. You treat the waste pathogen. You can treat the pathogens from the waste. This is for human waste, and this is at the wastewater treatment plant. Unless the digester's not working. And so this one was just, all the plumbing was around this digester and then into a leach field behind. And so, part of what I was looking into, what would it take to rehabilitate these things? And I'm going to talk more about this because I think the history of development and the history of development projects is about good intentions and upfront, lots of capital and lots of work up front, and then very little follow-up, and maybe not enough research up front to understand what might be sustainable. And so I'm going to talk about that today a little bit. So I founded the Program for International Energy Technologies. I'm one of the associate directors of Blum Center, like I said. I spent a year in the business school at UC Davis. Every year they take 8 scientists and they stick them in the business school. I'm a scientist because I'm a mechanical engineer. Because the idea is that scientists know how to, they know about technology, but they don't know how to commercialize it. Whereas, business students know how to commercialize stuff, but they just don't know what they should be commercializing. At least that's kind of the idea. So they put these guys together. About a year is probably about 2 months too much for me in the business school. Like 10 months was just about enough, and then 12 months was a little bit too much. I don't know, 2 years would be way too much. But I think it expanded kind of my view about projects and how you might get technology to move forward in some of these markets. And then kind of what got us going was this World Bank grant that I wrote still as a PhD student. And this kind of launched the beginning of my center, was doing this research for the World Bank around lighting. And I'm going to touch on that project today, partly because we're still working with it. The World Bank money ran out 2 years ago, and we're still working on it and kind of getting close. And if you guys have any questions, you can ask them, or I'll also have time for the questions at the end. Oh, and if you Google me, you might also see a picture like this. This is back when I worked, I was doing my first development job, which was at Whirlwind Wheelchair International. And my job was to try to get the shops in all these countries that we traveled through East, Southern, and West Africa, up to date on wheelchair building technology. So my first job was in the wheelchair industry, looking at appropriate technology for wheelchairs, specifically in Africa. Dreadlocks were a great thing to have when you're traveling through Africa. You get a lot of respect, and you get to talk to everybody. And so the reason I show this map, though, is because if you want to know about something, this is true of almost any technology, you have to live, you have to breathe it, you have to sleep it, you have to live with the technology, you have to know it inside and out if you're really going to do good design and understand it. And I think most people don't get that, is that you really have to know it inside and out. Then you can begin to make decent design decisions. And I'm not just talking about designs of products, I'm talking about designs of businesses and anything like that. You have to understand the market, you have to understand the customer, and it doesn't take, you don't spend 2 weeks on the internet and talk to 6 people and then you're an expert on it, which I think was what people did last decade, a lot of. And so we did this, and back then the only way to find these people who were in this was actually go there and travel and meet them and talk to them. And so I spent some time working in these different shops, about a decade, and I'm still in touch with a lot of these shops, doing capacity building, coming up with appropriate designs, training people, understanding the terrain, and I was an engineer, I was a master's student, and to me, if you have the right bearings in the wheelchair, or if you have the right seating system, that's what's going to make this thing a success. Put the user in the wheelchair. How does it feel? What improvements can you do? What kind of steel can you use, et cetera, et cetera? That's how setting up the right production, training people, right? That's what's going to push the technology out there. And it worked all over the place. And so I actually ended up working in Central and South America, the Middle East, and then understanding that a lot of these designs translated. And so which part of this design translates and which part doesn't. And I think with technology, that's a really interesting thing, is you have like a product, and then understanding in a certain context, it's appropriate, and in another context, it's not, and which parts are appropriate, and how do they translate? And so we did a lot of this cross-pollination between markets for wheelchairs. And so this is kind of what I was trying to avoid, was giving a man a fish. Well, that means you go to Wheelchair Foundation, and they go to some big wheelchair producer in China, and they buy tens, hundreds of thousands of wheelchairs. And you usually get them large, because if you get them large, everyone can fit in them. Right? So even a little kid is riding in a large wheelchair, but we know everyone will fit. And then you ship them to Zambia or wherever, and you give them away. Trying to avoid that. So instead, what we were doing was empowering people, and this was people with disabilities, to build their own wheelchairs. So we were doing this. Right? And so when you teach a man to fish or a woman to fish, they eat for life. And so as an engineer, that's what I was going to do. And people were going to eat for life. And the part that I wasn't really tuned into was, unless there's no river, right? So you can teach somebody to fish if there's no river. And the no river part of it manifested itself into me going back and visiting these shops and seeing the same 10 wheelchairs that we had built the year before sitting there, because nobody had any money to buy them. And so, and I had no clue about the market. I wasn't interested in the market, right? But these were friends of mine that I was setting up in business and training. And then I would come back and they go, hey, well, what's up? They're sitting here. Help us. What's going on? You help capitalize the business. And so I think that really bothered me a lot. I mean, you put all your effort in, and you actually see that the problems the challenges that you were meeting, which probably needed to be met, a lot of them weren't the real challenges in what you're doing. So I would like to say I went from there to here. So I left Africa with my tail between my legs, and then I created this program at UC Davis. Well, that's not really what happened. What happened was I went back to school to focus more on energy, which was originally what I was doing. But I still had this passion for working in the developing world, and I still wanted to work with my friends that I'd been working with. Started my PhD, ended up out on the East Coast working for Dean Kamen. You guys know who he is? Not Dan Kamen, but Dean Kamen, the guy who invented the Segway. And he wanted to take his extremely complicated Stirling engine to Bangladesh and or Zambia and try to do, use renewable energy to create electricity in villages for people who didn't have it. So I ended up working for him for about a year and a half. I was the engineer on that project. Iqbal Qadir, do you guys know who he is? He's one of the founders of Grameen Phone. He was one of the usual suspects on that project. He's now out at MIT. And then when I was working out there, I met Amy Smith. And you guys know who Amy Smith is? And she asked a friend of mine and myself to do a demo for her D-Lab class. So we did it. She liked it. I was out there anyway. She asked me if I wanted to work with her, so I did. So I worked with her for a little over a year at D-Lab. This is about 5 or 6 years ago. Just getting started, her D-Lab was. It was 1 class or 2 classes. Now it's 15 classes, all kinds of different D-Labs. Then I went back to Davis to finish my PhD after about a year and a half on the East Coast. And I really had this idea that I wanted to start a D-Lab out of Davis. And I didn't know what it would look like or anything like that. All I had was the lessons that I had learned, you know, in my wheelchair career, the stuff that I had learned working with Amy, and my education, which was around renewable energy. And so I did manage to start this 2 D-Labs at UC Davis. And then recently, about a year ago, working with the Blum Center, we've started out a global poverty class. And there's a class that Nanya Roy teaches out here. Is it global? I don't know what the name is. Global poverty? Yeah, OK. So we stole the first part of the name. And then we're teaching this class up at Davis with sort of the same purpose, is getting younger undergraduates involved with these issues about poverty and work and development early on. I teach it with an economist, Tu Jarvis, and he teaches the critical thinking part of it, so he's kind of giving you the economist view, the World Bank development indicators, and then I'm out there just talking about what happens in the trenches. You know, what are people doing? And I think for students, it inspires them a little bit because, you know, this is something you could do. You know, forget about what the World Bank says about poverty in general, but this is stuff you can do. So that's and today I'm mostly going to talk about D-Lab 1 and D-Lab 2, what we do at Davis. And so, do you guys know, you ever heard of the school down south called Stanford? So did you know that in 1970, the product design school at Stanford invented talking to the user? So before that, nobody ever talked to the user when they were doing product design. But you know, Stanford realized that people weren't doing that, and they invented this concept of talking to the user. And so I've invented, in a similar way, the 4 lenses of sustainability, and right here. So when you're doing a project and people, it's what, the triple bottom line or whatever it happens to be. But the methodology that we use in D-Lab, or what we try to teach, is if your project should be sustainable in all 4, with all 4 of these lenses, your project should be sustainable. And that's how you should approach it. So, you know, we talked about before that technical is what I was doing when I was working for the wheelchair company, but I was paying no attention to the economic. Environmental, maybe that wasn't that important on that kind of project, but maybe it was. And certainly social, I was probably paying attention to, right? But not the social part about it where I have to understand who's important in order to get a project to sustain. And so that's what we're talking about with social. That's often who are the stakeholders, how does the community take to a project? And I think the biggest question, I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, is how do you establish ownership? Right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some work we did in Nigeria around water utilities. And we're talking about doing this project in the Delta about getting water to people using, like, you know, solar pumping and you know, a water tank. And they're talking about getting local ownership of this. And how do you do it? Well, the community should take ownership. We'll pay for we're going to install this, but the community has to take ownership of running the utility. And so I'll ask all you guys, how many of you feel ownership on your water utility? Does anybody? Right. So, you know, why am I going to expect somebody in the Niger Delta to have ownership of their water utility when I actually feel none? And how could I possibly teach that? Well, I don't really have the answer to that, but it gives me a different perspective on how I might look at it, right? Is, you know, we actually don't have that much ownership of a lot of things that we do and that we're part of. So I think it's a really interesting question. I'll talk about it a little bit more. And then just in general, the D-Lab class, if you look at the first one, oops. D-Lab 1, which is energy and development, it says an overview. Really what that is feasibility studies. So what we do is, and this has kind of been honed down over the last few years, is rather than, you know, just have students engage in issues about development and go out and do projects, maybe they're just doing research or whatever they happen to be doing. And trying to figure out a way to make sure that you can get tangible results from that. Instead, what we do is we find clients who need things done. And we say, look, I will give you 4 students for 10 weeks, and they will help you. And so the thing that one of the big holes we found was feasibility studies. A lot of times projects don't have, they're either started and they haven't done a feasibility study, they're either trying to get funding and they haven't done a feasibility study. There's no money for that, right? These days they don't pay for feasibility studies. So what will help them is do a feasibility study. And that's pretty much what we do. We use the 4 lenses of sustainability. We try to do a feasibility study for the client. And we deliver them something that they can either use to guide their project, or they can use it as something to raise money for the project if it makes sense. We don't necessarily tell them, at least the way I try to run the class is you're not telling the client really what to do. You're giving the client information so they can act. You're getting them to the next part of their decision. So they have to have a client. We have a local mentor at UC Davis who can help them with anything technical or business and anything like that. And the first 2 weeks of the class, they work with a client to understand the problem. 2 or 3 weeks. So all they do is work back and forth to really define the problem and make an agreement with the client that this is what they're going to do over the 10 weeks. Most students don't have to do that in classes. And it's actually a really big challenge, and it's really frustrating, right? Because the client doesn't really know what they want. And you only have 10 weeks to do it, and you only have 4 weeks to do, four people to do it. And so how do you scope it correctly? But this is typical. I mean, this is something they're going to run into. So I think it's a really good skill to give them. And then D-Lab 2 is designing for the market. Who knows who Paul Polak is? So this used to be called Design, Development, and Dissemination, or Design and Dissemination. And then Paul Polak came to visit us last year and kind of put my students through the ringer, right? I don't know if you ever talked with Paul Polak, but you know what he does? He does the most terrible thing in the world. He asks them questions that they have to answer. He just says, so, how much does that cost to install? How many years is that going to take to pay back? That's what he just asked, really, really simple questions. And so this idea of designing for the market is really what the second class is about. Who's the customer, and how are you going to make this product or this service such that it serves the customer and they can afford it? And that's really what this whole thing's about. Part of it's about designing a product. It could be about designing the business. So that's really the focus of the second class. But the second class is very hands-on. You're actually going to design, build, and test a technology. So the emphasis is that you get your hands dirty and you build something. The first one, you do get your hands dirty, but you do it in a series of labs that we run. And they're pre-set up. You're going to make charcoal, or you're going to build a wind generator, or you're going to set up an irrigation system, and I'll talk about that. So you get the commonality is that you have a client in a developing country that you work for. The commonality is that you get your hands dirty. The difference is the first one has more of it's a feasibility that's more of a paper feasibility study, and the second one is you're actually designing and testing a real product. And so like I talked about, well, these are some of the areas that we focus in. Right now at UC Davis, the D-Lab only looks at energy and development. At MIT, they do mobility, and they do IT, and they do lots of other things. And at UC Davis, we will expand as the right champions like myself come along, and the right clients, and as the right situation emerges, we'll do that. But for right now, it's just energy and development is what we're looking at. And like I said, we look at lighting and cooking, water and sanitation, irrigation and post-harvest, and renewable energy. And anything else the client might want us to look at, as long as it's got kind of an energy focus. It doesn't have to be a product. It can be an intervention. Oh, these are the why do we care slides. Does anyone want to see the why do we care slides? Do we already care? Okay, you don't. Okay. Well, the point is that Priuses are not going to save us. Windmills are not going to save us. They might help a little bit. This is a wave machine. And we all know that this is happening, right, is that if we really care about CO2 and energy use, right about now is when the developed world and the developing world are starting to use about the same amount of energy. And same amount of energy, but way more greenhouse gases in the developing world, right, because most of those processes are less efficient. I don't know if this is a why do we care. This is a why do I think it's interesting slide, though. Kilowatt hours per person per year. And if you look at these different countries, it's pretty interesting that Haiti uses 38, and Iceland uses 31,000, right? And Haiti and Zambia, which have similar incomes, Zambia still use 20 times as much per capita of electricity. It's pretty crazy. And so this is something that we actually look a lot at, is getting services to people who, even in Bangladesh, where they're hooking up 400,000 homes a year. Can you imagine a rural electrification program that's doing 400,000 homes a year? It's still going to be 200 years before everyone's on the grid, though. So a monumental effort, but it's still going to take forever. So what that does is it lines up two things, and these are the two things that we need to do if we're going to look at a project, at least as far as I'm concerned, is you have to have a need. Well, that's not so hard to find, right? A well-defined need, that's harder to find. A client with a well-defined need, that's even harder to find, but it's still doable. And then you have to find an opportunity. And if there's just a need and no opportunity, then it's not worth looking at. And so if we talk about a need, about electrification, well, what's the opportunity? If I'm in a place where people are charging batteries or buying kerosene, is there an opportunity there? Of course there is, because people are spending money already. So the question is, can you offer better service at less money? That's the opportunity. We know what the need is. What's the opportunity? So in Zambia, when they revitalized the electrical grid, I think it's UNESCO did, they did a couple of things. First, they made it a lot harder to steal electricity. The other thing they did was they put prepayment on everyone's bill. So now you go buy a scratch card and you get electricity just like you would for phone airtime on your phone. You pay for it, and your electricity runs until that runs out, and you got no more electricity, right? The other thing they did was they made the people who hadn't paid their bills pay their bill. How do they do that? Well, when you go buy a $5 worth of electricity, $2.50 of it goes to the bill you owe, and $2.50 of it goes to the bill to the electricity you're gonna use. Pretty brilliant, right? But it's effectively doubled the cost of electricity if you were never intending on paying your bill, right? So it's effectively so what's happening in Zambia is the people who used to cook with electricity have found it cheaper to cook with charcoal now. Pretty crazy, right? So I'm just showing you this was an opportunity for the people who make charcoal. This is unfortunate, but this is an opportunity, right? But I guess what more the point is these are the kinds of things you have to understand if you're going to look at energy interventions in these places, because there are so many different stakeholders, and there's so many different there's so much different competition as far as energy is concerned. And so I don't even know why this slide is here. So this is me talking to charcoal guys on the side of the road in Zambia. And do you think these guys know about global warming? He said yes.
They know about it. They experience it.
Well, actually, I don't know if they may or may not experience it. That I don't know, but they do know about it, right? This is the thing I find really interesting, is that I can go to the side of the road and I can talk to this guy about global warming. Because, he has access to a television, right? He's heard the left and the right, probably. And he knows conceptually what it is, and he kind of understands what it is. And I was telling him about renewable charcoal and how you can make, it's a technology that we worked out at MIT, and we also do in my lab. And he's super interested in it. I told him the effect and greenhouse gases. And he said, well, why in the world would I ever want to do that when I can just walk over here and cut down a tree? Right? And he was 100% right. And so these are the kinds of things that when you're looking at interventions like renewable charcoal, like different cook stoves, these are the kinds of things that you're faced with. These are the kind of entrenched technologies and stakeholders that you're going to be competing against. So it's not a simple thing. It's not simple. You really got to understand it. This is Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Every day, every morning. You guys have seen this Haiti. This is all due to charcoal. Charcoal's a big thing. That's Dan Kammen's looked at it a lot. Indoor air pollution from charcoal. That's just one of them. Very quickly, I'll tell you about the labs we do in D-Lab. And so D-Lab 1, you're going to do a feasibility study, but I want you guys to get your hands dirty. And so we have a lab where people just measure all kinds of different lighting that people might use in the countries we're going to be working in. And so we actually do measurements of kerosene, candles, and then we we look at, oh, look at this. We look at all the other options that people have come up with. This one's dead. What's that? No, that one doesn't wind up. I had another one here that I wanted to show you. Oh, I had the Stanford guys one here, but it somehow didn't make it. And so we measure, and the interesting thing about that is you might measure in lux, which is the incident light on a surface, you know, I don't know, 3 lux or 10 lux. This is for a light, either for what people are paying for kerosene or what people are buying, some kind of renewable lantern or something, a solar lantern. And if you go to OSHA and you look at what 10 lux does, they'll say you don't have any light. And so the need is light, and the opportunity is that you can sell light that people think is not worth anything for a lot of money. Right? You can sell, people spend $3 or $6 or $20 a month on kerosene. Pretty interesting, right? In the US, there's no market for that because OSHA says you don't have any light. But people are regularly using this much light, 10 lux or something like that, to either read by or cook by or something like that. But the point is, getting the students to understand that something that's a whole order of magnitude less is still useful. Does that make sense? And until you've actually measured it and you look at the numbers and you look at the light, you really don't know what it feels like. And so that's what we do in that lab. And then we make charcoal out of corn cobs. So you ask me, why is UC Davis better than MIT? Why is it better than Stanford? And why is it better than Berkeley? You guys asked that at the very beginning of the talk, right? Well, I mean, it was sort of implied.
Davis is part of Berkeley.
Thine who came from within. Well, it's better for certain kinds of things because we have a huge working farm up at Davis. And so if I say to the guy who runs the student farm, and hey, I need some biomass to make charcoal out of, he asks me what kind of biomass I need and how much I need, and whether I need it dry or whether I need it wet. So we have, and if you talk about energy issues in the developing world and the link between energy issues and agriculture, since 60 to 80% of the people are in agriculture, it's huge. So we have a very big advantage that we have a working farm at UC Davis, tons of people who understand everything about ag, not just ag here, but also ag in developing countries. We've had an international ag development program for 20 years. So we have a kind of an advantage for certain kinds of projects. And so this is when D-Lab just started out, because if you look at the photo over there, that's actually Jessica Betchahol. Does anyone know her? Yeah. She actually, I worked on projects with her at MIT, and she's out here now, although she's doing an internship for IDEO, I think. So she came out and helped me, and if you look, that's my garage and that's my house, because it's before I had any footprint on UC Davis's campus. I had a class, but I didn't have a lab or a workshop or anything. And I couldn't get a fire permit, so I did it at my house. Anyway, the point is, we take corn cobs and we make charcoal from it. We carbonize it, we briquette it, and then we burn it at the barbecue. The nice thing about that was it shows a technology that's rampant or that's everywhere in the countries we're working, but it shows a twist on it, right? And so you understand the basic concept behind making charcoal, but then you also see that, wow, here's another way to make it. And then in making the charcoal, and believe me, it's a pain in the ass, right? You have to get all this corn, you have to burn it all, you have to crush it, you have to briquette it, you have to mix it. We use a cassava, cooked cassava. And the reaction you get from students when they read the article about renewable charcoal compared to when they do the charcoal lab is huge, right? Most people think it's kind of a pain to make the charcoal briquettes, right? But most people, when they read the article, they think it's a pretty awesome technology, right? And so the question is, if your brother lived in Zambia, would you set him up in this business? Is it such a great idea that you'd set your brother up and he could make a ton of money doing it? That could be one of the criteria, whether it's a good idea. And then we build a wind generator. Has anyone heard, and you can say no, of humdinger wind energy? You have the little flapping belt. Has anyone seen the old video of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge that destroys itself? That's aeroelastic flutter. So what if you were to harness that energy, and then you were to put a magnet or some way on that belt to collect the energy, to harvest it? Well, you'd come up with Humdinger, which is a company that I own part of, that was coming up with a different turbine design. Now, why is this interesting? Has anyone ever tried to build a small wind turbine? Pain in the butt?
I just got back from India working on this.
Yeah, kind of a pain, right? To make them small and get the right alternator or whatever you're going to use to harvest it and convert it. Yeah. And so if you didn't have to design anything really well-shaped to grab the wind, that would be nice. And so a belt doesn't need any kind of special shape. So, and I'll talk about more afterwards if you guys are interested in. But the point is, you learn everything about harvesting wind, harvesting energy from the wind. You learn about the Betz limit, and you learn about how much energy is in the wind and efficiency of windmills and all that. But you build a different kind of technology in the lab that's an alternate to it. And so that's our wind belt lab. Irrigation, we look at, oh, look, we're back at the student farm. Are you guys going to give me a tour of the student farm here afterwards at Berkeley? Anyway, one of the nice things is, but the one on the right is in my backyard again, so that's early on. But the one on the left is after I made friends with the people at the student farm. And so now I'm friends with them. And so what we do during D-Lab 1 is we do an irrigation lab. And what we do is we go and we learn about all the different ways to irrigate, which are, whether you're going to flood it, whether you're going to use drip, whether you're going to use sprinklers, kind of the more industrial or small-scale farming, not super small scale, but first world techniques. And then we do a drip lab where we use a bunch of different of the technologies that people have been, I'll say, marketing in developing countries. So who knows about the treadle pump? Who's heard of a treadle pump? Who's not heard of a treadle pump? Oh, wow. I used to say that the treadle pump may not be the most widely disseminated technology, but the story of the treadle pump was the most widely disseminated, right? Which is common among development organizations, right? We have drip tape. Drip tape is going to solve all your needs. It's cheap, it's easy, it's this, it's that. And so people just start thinking that this is the right thing to do. Drip tape. If we could just afford drip tape. And what we did was we have the drip lab where we demo it, but I had a team of students actually evaluate all the different drip tapes. Not only to find which were more effective, which brand. And we're talking about drip tape that's focused on the developing world. So this is Drip Tech and IDE and other that's Paul Polak's old company. But also to go to India and talk to farmers, not just promoting it, but to find out if it actually suited their needs and when. And so this is, I think, some of the first published data that people have studied and looked at what these companies are claiming and actually looked at what the real data is. And we have some of that stuff published on our website, and we're going to be doing more of it. The point is, drip saves a lot of water. It saves you a lot of labor. And in tons of instances, it's not appropriate, right? So when do you recommend it? So we learned a little bit about that in our lab. And then I was going to talk a little bit about what we're doing right now. How are we doing for time? 10 minutes, all right. So these are the projects that we're doing this quarter, and we all have mentors and local clients. We're doing a biogas in Tanzania, irrigation demo in India, a couple microgrid projects, plastic recycling, a high efficiency charcoal production that's not necessarily renewable, and renewable resource study in Malawi. And then, this is the fun part. So at D-Lab and MIT, everybody who took the class traveled. Do you think that was a hard class to fill? No. And travel is paid for, too. Wow, right? And that class is always full. In my class, we travel when it's appropriate. If the project makes sense and the right thing to do and there's funding lined up, is to go and work with the client in country, we'll do it. And I'd say maybe a third or a quarter of my students will travel. A lot of them, if they stay with the program, will end up traveling at some point or another. And my classes are also full, which is good news. It means you don't have to travel. You don't have to give free lunch to get people in the door. But it helps. Right. You have to give a quarter of the people free lunch. Is what it is. And so I think one thing that is attractive, there's a couple things that are really attractive about D-Lab to students. One thing is they get their hands dirty. And the other thing is they actually often get to go out in the field. And so these are a couple examples of going to the field. And one of them is in the Niger Delta I was going to just show you. And this is this concept of community mapping and stakeholders analysis. Is everyone at least a little bit familiar with those two terms? And so community mapping is just understanding the resources, the people, the geography, everything you can imagine about a community. This is advantageous for the people working there, but it's also advantageous for the community. Where did I learn about community mapping? I learned about it from my partners in the Niger Delta who specialize in that. So we supposedly were going there to do capacity building, but the truth was that we got capacity built when we went there because we worked with our partner and they showed us how to do community mapping. And this was amazing, how they went through a community in a couple of weeks and they really learned a lot about it. And so I'm using a lot of their techniques and their curriculum that they use for community mapping. And so this is something that a lot of our projects we need to do. And we focus on energy a lot of times when we do. So we do what's called energy mapping. So in the Delta, it's not like in India. We're working with microgrids in India. We're working on them in the Delta also, small electricity grids. In the Delta, the communities run along the rivers. And so they're long and skinny. So is that a different problem, setting up a microgrid, than it might be in India, where the population is kind of radially distributed? Is that a different problem? It's a way different problem. It's a way more expensive problem. But the competition in the Delta is like what we've seen is kerosene, candles, flashlights, and generators. The thing we didn't expect in Nigeria was every third house had a generator. And so can you guys see that generator I'm looking at down there? Imagine in Nigeria, if you look at I think it's about 130 kilowatt hours per person per year that they use as reported. And that's just taking the total generation of the country and dividing by the population. But multiply that by 3, and that might be what people are getting from generators. So you can see, and you know what kind of emissions a small generator is going to make. These generators are called pass your neighbor, or pass my neighbor. That's the local name for them. Because when you get one, you essentially pass your neighbor. Because you now can watch television or have a deep freeze, things like that. So this is something that we're also looking at in the Delta. Are there ways to do more efficient ones? What products would need to beat this? And this is what we saw. People are running sound systems, deep freezes. This is in the Delta. Looking at water, health. This I'm going to talk about really quickly. This is the one in Tanzania, a slaughterhouse. This is one of the projects this quarter. In Dar es Salaam, they have a huge government-run slaughterhouse, and they have to pay. They have to haul away about 3 times a year all of the biological waste. So whatever hasn't been picked out to make soup with or whatever ends up getting landfilled. You can imagine the health hazard. It costs a lot of money, right? So there's clearly a need and an opportunity lining up here. And the opportunity is to make energy from this. Now, this is more interesting than a lot of biogas projects because the biggest problem with most biogas projects is the feedstock. Biogas projects work well if you have continuous feedstock, like in a dairy or something like that. They don't work that well in the small biogas projects like they sometimes do in Nicaragua or places like that, where they have a small balloon digester and you have some animals, maybe 3 or 5 animals. Why? Why does that not work very well? What do people do with their animals often? They sell them and they eat them. And so if biogas is kind of a continuous process, and you buy animals and you raise them and you sell them or eat them, it actually doesn't work very well. Or if the livestock is dispersed, which it usually is. And so biogas, more than even solar or wind, is super site specific. And so this is amazing. The opportunity here is that we have a great site and we have a need. So this is a project that we're working with a member of the government who actually is taking my class right now. He's here for 12 months at Davis studying. And they have probably funding for this. So the feasibility study that we will do for him will probably be used. And you can see so part of the opportunity is they have to pay $33,000 a year just to haul the stuff away. So we have that at least to start with. And that's not to mention the energy that we might sell. How much more time do we have? Okay. And then the last one I'll talk about is the World Bank project that we work with. So Prahalad, what does he say? What's he famous for?
The myth.
What is the myth? that there's a fortune at the base of the pyramid. What does Paul Pollack say, among other things? Designing for the market, right? Miniaturization. Taking big things like Israeli drip systems and making them small, right? And who's the other main player? Should be one more. Well, what if we were going to take those two things and combine them together, right? We would end up with something that was small, that we sold to people at the base of the pyramid. Oh, and Grameen. We'd incorporate microfinance in it. Is that what we would do? So we wrote a proposal to USAID with all three of those things together, and we didn't get the money, just to let you know. But what we did come up with the World Bank money, and what I kind of wanted to do was run you through this design exercise, but I won't have a lot of time to do it, was the Smart Light, which I'm going to actually distribute. And this is a product that's targeted for people who are using candles and kerosene. This, I think it's not a bad product. I think that we almost did. Oh, okay. I think that another redesign would make it cheaper and better and brighter. But the cool thing about this and the packaging was all designed in DLab. And it's all going to be distributed this summer by DLab students. And it's going to be distributed in such a way that it sells for a price that both the distributor can make money and everyone, and the wholesaler and everyone can make money. So it's not charity-based model at all. And so I'm going to pass these guys around. And if you guys want to come up afterwards, I have like most of the prototypes to show you along the way. And I think that's pretty interesting. And that's part of the DLab too, which I didn't get to talk too much about, is actually making prototypes and getting enough across. This, by the way, is the prototype that I showed to the World Bank. Can you see that? It's a lighting system for the developing world. Can't you tell? This one, I think, is out of batteries. But it was supposed to point out the fact that the system could be modular. This got me 200 grand, though, I got to tell you. The point mostly being that when you build something and you can demonstrate it, it's easier to convince people. At least you can show your ideas a lot better. And so that's what we do. And lots of different prototypes. And then we have the final product, which I'll pass around, that we're actually going to try to sell in Zambia. And I'll go to the money slide here. Oh, this is what it's about, understanding the market, right? The opportunity is people are already paying for kerosene. But the question is, who is doing that and how are they doing it? Talking to the people who do informal distribution, and in Zambia, that would be the people who buy and sell bicycle spares, understanding how they do it. This is the kind of research we did. Using international partners, we actually have some design partners in Hong Kong and Bangladesh. Having a website for the local one. And the money slide on the Smart Light, and we can talk about whether or not any of these bullets are true, is that it lasts 2 to 5 years. It costs $12 to $18, which is, I think, too much money. Puts out about 20, 25 lumens, no fire hazard. Supposed to pay back in 2 to 3 months, but probably closer to 6. And we're going to be launching it in Zambia in 2012. So that's the one, I think, product that we actually brought to market so far. So I'm up for questions, and thanks a lot for your attention.
Hi. Thanks, Kurt. That was excellent. Mitra Arjun from Natural Innovation, and what we do is support commercialization of technology in developing countries. And a lot of what you said mirrored my own experience, especially in India. But the key challenge I see in what I see contradictory in some of the slides is...
My slides?
Yeah, really, of course.
Okay.
Yeah. Is affordability, right? Affordability is the key issue. But when you look at the literature about design here, it's all about user-centric design. And often, user-centric design is contrary to affordability because it means customization, which means smaller market sizes.
No, I told you that Stanford invented user-centered design. I didn't tell you that was it was designing for the market, which is different from user-centered design. Absolutely.
Exactly. Because especially you see that's the big difference between stoves and lights. Like lights have been a big success because you can sell the same product across most of the developing world, and stoves have been, in many ways, a failure because it's customized for every market. They can't get the volumes up and the price down to where people can afford it.
No, I totally agree with you. Designing for the market and designing for the user are different. And You don't always have to design for the user, but you always have to design for the market. Yep.
We have a question over here.
Hi, Kurt. Thanks for the talk. I'm wondering if you can give some insight or speak to how design for the bottom of the pyramid and design for the developing world can move outside of universities. I see universities doing so many great things at Stanford and Colorado State with EnviroFit and MIT and Berkeley and Davis, but, you know...
Okay, yeah, okay. So, and I agree with you. The problem with working in university partly is it moves kind of slow, and it's hard to really react to the market. Like, the biggest problem with the smart light is by the time we got it out, it was a year or two behind. You know, and if we were a real company, we would be doing the redesign and redistribution, but we're much slower. And there's other reasons that universities are not super efficient at doing these kinds of things. I think the interesting things that I see happening right now, and we're working with some of these organizations, are small for-profit companies who are focusing on energy. And like, for example, in India, a solar microgrid will pay back in 2 years. So you can get your investment back on a microgrid in 2 years. And so these are actually pretty good businesses. And so I feel like if there's businesses that are pretty obviously, they pay back in short periods of time, they don't require too much capital, those are the kinds of things that I think will take off, and that's the way to get out of the university. We work with a couple of different companies, Diseño, I don't know if you know those guys, and Value Development Initiatives, and that's exactly what they do. And they always make the business case every time they do it. So, you know, whether or not we're piddling around at the university, I'm not really sure. We may be educating people who are going to go out and not piddle around. I don't know. Yeah?
What makes smart light better than your ordinary flashlights? What are the technical innovations?
Okay. So one of the innovations we used is an old innovation you use in energy efficiency. It's not, and I don't know if it's an innovation, is that the first thing you, what's that?
How did you achieve that?
Well, no, the first thing you do when you design a product that uses, and they did the same thing with the one laptop per child, is before you start adding renewables, you lower the power use. And so what we did is we optimized cost entirely, right? And the way to do that was to reduce the power use. And so by spending more money on some of the key components that most people wouldn't spend money on, we actually lowered the overall price and raised the efficiency. And so by spending a lot of money on electronics and spending a lot of money on the LED itself, we were able to downsize the battery, and then there's a cascading effect that happens. As soon as your power, the wire is thinner, the wire costs less, there's less, it's just, and so that's really, we took the same approach you would do if you were going to install solar on your house. First thing you would do is reduce your load, then you'd add your solar. That's pretty much how we did it. And we have a paper published that talks about that.
Okay, well, thank you again
Hey,
for a
thanks,
great
guys.
talk. Thank you.
Who's going to give me a ride home? Awesome. What's that? That's what I mean. Yeah, just.
All I have to do is